Hi, I'm Selena coming to you from a new setup. I haven't quite decided if this is how I'm keeping it, but I'm home for winter break, and so I'm here and I'm with my big bookshelves. And I used to sit on the floor. If you go and find my really old, well, I mean, I guess I'm still a new YouTuber, but if you look and find my first videos, which don't, then you'll see I'm sitting on the floor and it looks like a big mess, but I figured that this might be a little neater, and I still wanted to display some of my favorite books, so let me know if you like the new setup. I haven't decided if I'm keeping it yet. I could change it around. Can you tell I've already changed it twice? Anyways, today I'm going to be talking about the classics that I read in the month of November. The month of November is not quite over, but I've already finished all the classics that I will have finished, and so let's just get right into those. I read 3 classics this month, and as for genres, 2 of them were fantasy. You could probably call them fantasy. And then the one that's not fantasy is like a detective mystery book. I hate this glare in my glasses, but I need to see, so I'm sorry, you're gonna have to deal with it. Without further ado, let's just get straight into the classics that I read this month. The first one is Haroun and the Sea of Stories by Salman Rushdie. I'm not positive that this is considered a classic by everyone. This is definitely a more modern classic. I'm pretty sure it was written in the 90s or something. Yeah, it was published in 1990, and it sort of has gotten the classic treatment by Penguin. In some circles, it's considered a modern classic of children's literature, which I don't know how I feel about that, but I'm gonna leave it in this classics wrap up just in case it's a well-known fact that this is a classic. So I've classified this as fantasy, but it's not really what you would generally think of if you think of fantasy. This is much more of an absurdist, nonsensical children's story, which I usually love. Spoiler alert, I didn't love this one. This is a children's tale that is very absurd and nonsensical, and it also has elements of allegory in it. A lot of this felt like an allegory that I just didn't understand. But the actual story is about this boy named Haroun, whose father is a storyteller, but when the Sea of Stories, where all stories are born and come from, it is poisoned, his father stops being able to tell stories in the same way that he used to. And so that is really devastating for Haroun and his father. And so Haroun goes on this journey to restore the Sea of Stories to what it once was. And I thought this was fine. I didn't really enjoy my read of it. Again, a lot of it felt like an allegory that I couldn't quite parse together for me. I feel like everything in this had a double meaning or something, and some people might find that masterful and smart, and I do agree that there was a lot that went into crafting this. If you look in the back, Salman Rushdie, he wrote a whole thing about the names in the book and where he got them and what they mean, and I do think that that added somewhat to the story, knowing what these names were, what the meaning of these names were, and that could tell you a little bit more about the role of that character. But I don't know that it worked as a story. This is what my friend Udi would call a story of ideas, maybe. And he always says that a story of ideas is only as good as the ideas that it tells. And I'm not sure that this one presented those ideas in as cohesive a way as I would have liked. I found it really hard to connect to. The absurdist humor did not work for me in this one. I usually love absurdist stuff, you can't really see, but oh, it's over here now. But Douglas Adams's stuff, Good Omens, I love that stuff. Alice in Wonderland, one of my favorite books. I tend to enjoy kind of absurdist, nonsensical stuff, but for some reason it just didn't work for me in this one. And I think it does have to do with the ideas that it presented and not fully being able to put them all together. And then along with that, and this may be due to my age, but I didn't really connect with the characters or the plot, and I can't really tell whether that's that's kind of on purpose because it is mainly about the ideas, or whether that is just me being too old. This is a children's book. I know Salman Rushdie did write this for his son, and so maybe it's me not being a child anymore that maybe not be able to really connect to this. I don't know. So yeah, I just didn't have the best reading experience with this one. It wasn't my favorite children's classic that I've ever read, and I do think that this is one where my age did impair my ability to just go with it and enjoy it for the story that it was. Due to that, I am just going to give this book 3 stars. I'm not going to give it like a 2-star, even though that was probably where my more of my enjoyment was, like a 2.5 star. I'm just going to round it up to 3 because it is a children's book and I don't know how much of my inability to just accept it as for what it was impairing my ability to like it. So it's a 3-star. I wouldn't really recommend it unless it really sounds like your thing. I don't know. I know people who liked it. I read this for a class, and some people did enjoy it. I just wasn't really one of them. And the next classic I finished this month was The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. So this is a detective mystery in the Sherlock Holmes series. This is a short story collection about the different cases that Sherlock Holmes takes with Watson. I've heard people say that this is a very like quintessential Sherlock Holmes story. It really gives you a taste for Sherlock Holmes's methods, all these different stories, and they're easy, quick to get through. I would recommend this as maybe one of your first Sherlocks. However, these short stories are not in chronological order, and a lot of them I found took place either between A Study in Scarlet or The Sign of the Four, which I have both read, and so, or they would reference something that happened in The Sign of the Four or A Study in Scarlet, so I personally would recommend you read both of those before this one, but then you can just move on to this one. And even though these aren't in any sort of chronological order, I wasn't super bothered by it, but that was mostly because I had the context of them from The Sign of the Four and A Study in Scarlet. And like I think all short story collections, there were some in this that I really enjoyed, really connected with, and had fun reading, and some that I just didn't care for as much. I did find that with this book, the beginning stories I was really into, and then by the end I sort of got tired of the formula because Sherlock Holmes stories really do use a formula. All detective mystery stories that are classic you do use a formula. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle breaks that formula in some of his things, and he kind of creates his own formula, but then he sticks to his own formula. And so this was a lot of his formula, and with different content, and I enjoyed going through the different content, and I even guessed some things, which I've never done with Sherlock Holmes before, but I do think that the repetitive nature got old. And with short story collections generally, I usually rate each short story in the collection and then make an average of all of them to then give the collection a rating on Goodreads, but I did not do that with this one, mostly because I felt like I couldn't really differentiate between all the stories and the nuances of what I liked and didn't like as much. Like most of them were a solid like 3.5 stars, and so I didn't really want to like rate each of them and do a review for each of them and really analyze each of them. I just wanted to give a blanket rating to this short story collection. I gave it 3.5 stars. I really enjoyed some of them, and it was like an enjoyable read, and then others brought the rating down a little bit. Yeah, I just gave this 3.5 stars. I enjoyed it. It was a good Sherlock collection, but yeah, I didn't love everything in this, and it did get old after a little while. And then the final classic that I read this month was The Two Towers by J.R.R. Tolkien. So I enjoyed this. I read The Fellowship of the Ring through September and October, and so I read this one in the end of November. I just finished this one today actually, so I haven't really had time to fully sit with it, so this is very raw thoughts, but we're gonna do it anyways. This is the second in the Lord of the Rings. I gave it 4 stars, which I rated it a little bit lower than I rated Fellowship. I gave Fellowship 4.5 stars, and I gave this one 4 stars, and I think that's just because first of all, I didn't enjoy this one as much, and partially that's probably because I just wasn't really in the mood for this book, but I do want to finish this series before the end of the year, and partially also because I wasn't as invested in the plot of the 2 plots going on in this book. I was really invested in Frodo and Sam's plot, but it took like half the book to get there, and so I was not quite as invested in the Saruman, Gimli, Legolas, and Aragorn plot. Like that wasn't as interesting to me, and I don't think I understood the nuances of it at all, but I also had a harder time staying focused on this one. I think it's because I got out of the habit of reading Tolkien's writing style. It sort of clicked with me in Fellowship after I kept reading, and this one, it never really fully clicked back, and I think it's because I took just such a long break, but I'm not going to be taking a break really between this and The Return of the King, and so hopefully that will help my experience and my enjoyment go up for that one. I also think another reason why I didn't enjoy this quite as much is because I remembered less of this book, and you would think that would make me enjoy it a little more, because it's like, oh, it's like a new book. But no, for me, it really kind of, like, I think one of the reasons I was able to enjoy Fellowship more was because I'd read it before. I remembered some of the stops. I remembered the structure of the plot enough to sort of pay attention to the characters and the writing and the description and stuff, whereas with this, I was not quite sure where it was going. I remembered the Sam and Frodo plot more, and I think that was my favorite plot back when I read it in like 9th grade or whatever, when I was like 14. Again, the beginning part of this book did not interest me as much, and I didn't remember a lot of it, and so it was hard to focus on the little details and the intricacies of it because I was having trouble paying attention and being engaged. I do feel like a reread of this book at some point, reread of the series, will remedy that, and I will, grow to love it a little bit more. I do feel like this is the book that I could really get into the intricacies of and really enjoy going through on a third reread or a second reread. I was still engaged with Tolkien's writing style in this, though. I also really enjoyed his characters. I saw different friendships developing in this book that were all very unique to the characters. I really enjoyed that. I loved how Gimli and Legolas have this sort of like competitive but mutual respect vibe about them, and I loved how different that was from Frodo and Sam, which was just like the utmost devotion and support. It was really good to see how their personalities shaped the friendships that they had, and I really liked that. I think Tolkien writes relationships among people really well. Yeah, in the end, I enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. I respect this book, but I did feel a lot more out of my depth with this book than I did with Fellowship, which is not a popular opinion. Usually people like read Fellowship and aren't a huge fan and then get into it and are fine with the next 2 books I've seen. I did struggle more with his like heavy dialogue and heavy description in a way that I didn't with Fellowship, and I do think that rereading this in the future could remedy that. We will see. We will see. So yeah, these are the classics that I read in the month of November. Thank you for watching this video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.